Hello everyone, welcome to the Daily Dharma Gathering for Monday, October the 17th. My name is Janet and I will be your host for this gathering. Joining us is Venerable Thupten Semkhe. Venerable Semkhe was Sravasti Abbey's first lay resident, coming to help venerable children with the gardens and land management in the spring of 2004. She became the Abbey's third nun in 2007 and received Bhikshuni ordination in Taiwan in 2010. You can have a look at the rest of Venerable Semkhe's bio, which you will find right below the video. We will have time for questions and comments as usual at the end, so if you have any, scroll down to the bottom of the page and type them in and I will pass them along. And Venerable Semkhe will be talking today about why we get into so much trouble. And with that, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Let's first start with bringing our awareness into the space that we are in right now, this evening. Letting go of the day as best as we can. Connecting with our body and mind in this space. And then using our breath as the focal object for a little bit of meditation here. First of all, doing a quick body scan to see if you've got any sort of fatigue or stress or tightness from the day. And if there are places in your body that need some attention, then by gently inhaling and exhaling, imagine that place softening and loosening as you breathe in and out. Just feel the body letting go. The breath helping that along. And then we gently turn our attention to the breath itself. Watching the inhalation and exhalation at the rising and falling of our belly. And to try to give the mind the opportunity to just have to pay attention to just one thing. If any thoughts, feelings arise, anything from the environment, take your attention away from your breath, just gently bring it back. A lot of ease and warmth. And then we'll take a moment to set a motivation or an intention for being together tonight. Taking a moment to have some deep gratitude that we've met the Buddha's teachings in this life. There are 7 billion plus people on this planet, and not including all the countless other living beings. Of those human beings, how many of them have met the Buddha's teachings? Not many. And out of those that have met the Buddha's teachings, how many of them are at this moment thinking about the Dharma? trying to bring it into their lives in a personal and real way. So let's really rejoice that we are doing that together right now. Using the Dharma to cultivate all of our good qualities and to really help us to figure out the ones that aren't helpful, subdue them, eventually eliminate them. Because in the short term, it brings a lot of peace, a little bit more clarity to our minds. In the long term, it helps to create the causes for many, many good things to come in the future. And it also really opens our heart to be of great benefit to the world, on whatever level that is for each and every one of us. So let's really rejoice at our opportunity that we have right now to share the Dharma together. Well, I like this month's topic, dealing with strong emotions. I mean, who doesn't have them, right? And I mean, it's part of being human. It's part of being a being in samsara. And what happens, I've been thinking about this as I kind of offered to do this tonight, is that when we're overwhelmed by really strong emotions, it really sometimes feels like our minds and our hearts get hijacked with these really powerful thoughts, these really powerful feelings that they kind of just take us away. They take us down the river. They overwhelm us. And what happens is that, at least my experience is that they compel me to do things so much of the time that isn't very skillful. Like when I'm overwhelmed with really strong emotions, my mouth moves, my body moves. And that's where I was thinking about how much trouble we can get into when we're under the control of these really strong emotions and afflictions. So now, lucky for us, we have the great fortune to have met the Dharma in this life. And that it's really, in some ways, it's an extremely powerful medicine. Because when we're under the control of these very strong feelings, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've got some kind of mental illness. You know, I'm not thinking clearly. I have all sorts of stories and preconceptions and dramas going and proliferating thoughts going on in my mind that I can't handle myself. So I really feel that I'm under some kind of mental illness. So luckily for the Dharma, we have our daily practice to help us to kind of use the Dharma as a preventative medicine. And what I have found over the years is that the more, if I keep a daily practice going, which is something we do at the Abbey here all the time, I become, or there's a familiarity that happens with our minds, that we begin to start taking care of them, to figure out, well, with these strong emotions, when we start exploring underneath them, we start figuring out perhaps there are some causes and conditions for these strong emotions that we're not even aware of. Because one of the things that I've discovered about the strong emotions that come up for me is that they've got some red flags. I mean, it may not seem to be apparent when you're getting overwhelmed by the strong emotions, because they seem to sometimes come out of nowhere, or they're somebody else's fault. But when you practice the Dharma on a daily basis and you start becoming familiar with your mind, you know, how we think what we think and how we feel what we feel, so that we learn slowly to discern what are the feelings and the thoughts that are helpful. What are the feelings and thoughts that bring some sort of happiness, some sort of peace, some sort of sense of satisfaction, connection in our lives? And then over time, we get to discern them from the thoughts and feelings that aren't helpful, the ones that tend to disturb us and agitate us, bring us into some different kinds of thinking that aren't helpful and that really disconnect us. So when we use Dharma as a daily practice, as time goes on, we start seeing more and more, as we become familiar with our minds, that there are these subtle, sometimes even unconscious, red flags that start to wave before these really strong emotions start coming up and start arising. They could be a particular state of mind. They could be different cooperative causes and conditions that, unless we were practicing daily, we wouldn't become aware of them, because some of them are on an extremely, extremely subtle level. So daily practice helps us to keep track of ourselves. That's part of the preventative medicine of the Dharma. And that the Dharma becomes the medicine to connect us to ourselves when these red flags start to wave, that unsettled mind starts to arise. So we can go for the remedy, because if we don't practice, those strong feelings and emotions really do feel like they're coming out of nowhere, or they're coming from somebody else. Somebody else is causing me to be really pissed off right now, really jealous, really angry, really craving and clinging, because we haven't taken the medicine, which is our Dharma practice daily, to figure out what's going on in our minds. So prevention is the best medicine, not just in our physical world as far as taking care of our bodies, but the Dharma is a prevention as well for our minds. And the Buddha taught many, many ways on how we can take care of our minds when these strong emotions take over. And one of the things that he has taught us is how to find out and discover and uncover what are some of the ways in which these strong emotions are fueled. How are they fed? Underneath the surface, as we go through our day, sometimes not even noticing. What are the things that we sort of dismiss? What are the things that we sort of suppress? What are the things that we sort of minimize about our experiences in our life? So the Dharma and the Buddhist teachings really help us to become very, very aware of some of the things that might be fueling and might be feeding and nourishing these very strong outbursts of emotions, which I don't know about you, but many times my strong emotion doesn't coincide with what's going on the outside. It could be something very small. And suddenly I'm over the top with my anger. I'm over the top with my grief. I'm over the top with my fear, my anxiety. And I'm looking at what's coming from the outside, and it's not that big of a deal. So something's been stewing, something's been stirring up underneath that emotion that's sort of exacerbating the reaction that's coming up. So there is a practice that we do here that's part of the Lamrim Chenmo. It's a beautiful checking meditation that gets us to start exploring what could be some of the causes and conditions in our lives that could be fueling these strong emotions. Something to look at. It's in some form or another, a few times a week, maybe even once a day. So I wanted to share these with you because I find them extremely helpful for me. This is part of my preventative medicine. The first one that the Buddha talks about is what he calls these predispositions of disturbing attitudes. So every time we get angry, every time we're proud or we don't tell the truth, even though those states of mind might dissipate, according to the Buddhist teachings, they don't go away. Those destructive emotions place some sort of potency, some sort of potential in our mind that, given the right conditions, the right factors, those things just sort of like you're watering a seed, that they just arise, they come out, whoop, they just boom, they just show up. So we have these predispositions, these potencies of the strong afflictions. And if you believe in any type of karma or rebirth, you figure we've got a lot of these potentials in our minds for countless lives. Okay, so that's the first thing to think about. The second one to think about is, what are the objects? What are the people? What are the situations that are our triggers? You know, what are the aversions? What are the attachments or the cravings in our mind that tend to get us stirred up? There could be socially acceptable ones, or they could be not so socially acceptable ones. They could be attachments or aversions like for technology, to food, to shopping online, extreme sports, intoxicants, gossiping, talking about people behind their backs, obsessions with how we look or how somebody else looks, our rivals, having strong aversions to people that we feel that we compete with, obsessions about our bodies or maybe other people's bodies. There are these objects in our life that when we come in contact with them, they stir up a lot of these unsettling states of mind. The third one that the Buddha says that we need to look at is what he calls detrimental influences. And these are really hard to look at because these are our friends, these are our family, these are our classmates and colleagues. You know, the folks that we hang out with, how do they influence us? You know, when it comes to our Dharma practice, when it comes to our personal integrity, when it comes to our values, in regards to our practice, you know, do the people in our life support us in virtue, or are relationships to them very conflicted? Because when we're with them, do they tend to distract us from our practice? Do they tend to take us away from the things that are meaningful and purposeful in our life? Maybe not so much in just unhealthy ways, but sometimes just in really frivolous, useless things. Like they don't really matter in the long term as far as what we really aspire to do in our lives to accomplish. So this is a really hard one because these are our family, these are our classmates, these are our colleagues. But we've got to take a peek at, like, you know, what kind of people do we have in our lives and how do they influence us? And I have really noticed as the years have gone on practicing the Dharma that sometimes the more that we engage in Dharma practice, sometimes there's kind of this attrition that happens with our friends, that we spend more time with our Dharma friends, and then some of the friends just kind of naturally kind of go by the wayside. Other friends, we find out that after a while, the relationship doesn't fit as much as it used to. Like we don't spend as much time. We don't seem to connect with them as much. What they ask us to do, we kind of go, yeah, I don't know if I want to do that tonight or not. You know, so after a while, we kind of have this natural reconfiguring of our relationships. And some of the relationships we have to make some choices about. So that's the other thing that the Buddha says that could be the fuel and the feeding of some of these very, very strong emotions is who influences us as far as our relationships. The next one, which is I've seen a lot this year, is the verbal and visual stimuli. You know, the social media, the internet, the magazines, the movies, we know what this is, right? How much media do we look at each day? You know, what do we do for entertainment? What do we do to relax? And how do these things shape our opinions? How do they shape our ideas about ourselves, about others, about the world? I mean, just look at this whole election season, how much it's polarized a whole country because of the way people think and what their opinions are and how much they believe people's opinions as fact. So to really start to examine how much of our time we really spend. The next one is habits or emotional patterns. Do we know what they are? Where does our mind go when left to its own devices? What is our default when something unexpected or unpleasant arises? Where do we go? When we get surprised, what's our immediate response? When we get something unpleasant that shows up without us even knowing it's there, it just shows up. What's our emotional response right away? It's so helpful to know what are our triggers and what is our default. And when we let our minds wander, kind of, where does it go? These are emotional mental habits, and we need to really examine those. We're kind of like the well-traveled rut in the middle of the road. You know, we go there, we go there, we go there over and over again. And then lastly, this is what the Buddha calls inappropriate attention. And this is where we get in a certain state of mind that all we start focusing on is all the negative aspects of our lives, or the negative aspects of somebody in our life, or something that we own, or something that somebody's doing, or a situation that's presenting itself. All we can see is what's wrong with it. And so what happens is that we have to ask ourselves, well, how many biases do we have? And how many opinions do we have? Opinions about others or situations that arise in our life based solely on what we think about them. There's no particular basis of fact, but how we basically bring our attention into a situation totally based on how we think about it, how we feel about it, and that really changes our relationship to that object or that person. Do we jump to conclusions? Do we have stereotypes about people? I mean, gosh, have you just watched your own mind this year start forming stereotypes and objectifying people in different parties and different persuasions and what they think and feel about our country? It's amazing to catch our minds getting so kind of our knees locked. This is the right way to think. This is the right way to move our country forward. So kind of as a summary is that these are the kind of questions that are worth asking ourselves, because the answers will supply some very important information on what might be the causes and conditions that bring our strong emotions. When you think, because we are in the desire realm, our 5 senses are uploading so much outer worldly stimuli all day long that you have to believe that this affects our mind and our hearts, not just on an apparent superficial level, but on a very, very deep unconscious level. And that it's very important to identify the influences and try to balance them, try to decrease them, so that when we have things come up in our lives, that we actually feel that we have some choice, that we have some say in what goes into our minds. And as a result, then we have some choice and say that's what's going to come out of our mouths, what's going to come out of our bodies in form of action, and what's going to really be sort of our internal experience for who we want to be. So it's so important to ask these very crucial questions on how are we influenced? What are the conditions that these strong emotions ride on? That we can really take the Buddhist teachings to heart and use those to sort of counteract these strong emotions. Use some preventative medicine so they don't overwhelm us and sweep us away. Because this is where we get into so much trouble. We can have a lot of mental suffering. And externally, we endanger our relationships to others because our minds are in such upheavals. So as we're looking out for ourselves, we can better respond to the world in a very clear, a very honest, a very compassionate way, which is what we all really want to do. So that really requires us taking this beautiful Dharma that we have on our life, that we've had the great fortune to meet, and use it as a daily medicine to kind of see what's going on the inside. Because we really do want to be part of the contributing cooperative causes for the peace and the harmony in our world. And this is one of the ways that I personally have through my past, 19 years now practicing the Dharma. This particular meditation and thoughts about these influences really helps me to get a lot smarter about what goes in to this person, so that I can really send out into the world what I truly want to send out, which is a lot of love, a lot of joy, a lot of wisdom. And so I have found this reflection very, very helpful over the course of time. So I hope that has been helpful, because I think strong emotions, they do get us in a lot of trouble. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if we have any questions or comments.
If not, we can do a little silent meditation, Janet. It's okay.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything yet, but it takes a moment or two sometimes for them to come in.
Okay, great.
I was kind of smiling to myself as you were talking and recognizing what was true for me in each of those categories. And I know that when I have the thought, this shouldn't be happening.
Yes. What does that do for you, Janet?
Oh, my chest gets tight. Usually my fists, my hands kind of clench into a fist, and I just kind of start stomping around and
Strategizing.
yeah, how I'm going to make it stop happening, and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great insight.
A question from Rebecca, who says, "Can you speak more about recognizing triggers, please?"
Okay. Well, I think a lot of how I've been able to identify my triggers, and part of it is that this meditation has helped me, is that as I've practiced the Dharma over the years, I have found two particular mental factors that play a very strong part in my afflictions. One of them is depression, and one of them is defensiveness. And so one of the things that I've learned is that when it comes to detrimental influences, that I've had a number of people in my life that have not really supported me in growing my good qualities. I was around a lot of not very helpful friends. And part of how I managed to be with them was to defend myself. So when I find out that I'm in a defensive posture, I am perceiving somebody who's either just giving me some feedback, is maybe telling me how they feel, or maybe just offering some suggestions, that I'm getting defensive because I feel that I'm being threatened. So defensiveness is usually an indication that I'm misperceiving somebody's feedback, somebody's support, as something that's challenging me rather than supporting me. That's one of the things. So it's usually, my triggers tend to be in situations where I'm asking for feedback, or somebody's asking to give me feedback, or somebody is giving me some ideas on how to do things differently than the way I think they should be done. Right? So defensiveness is one of my factors, and that's some of my triggers. As far as depression goes, is that I think it was just a feeling, it's just been kind of a conditioning that I've had for a lot of my life, is that I was always told that I wasn't quite up to par. So when I get into situations where I'm being put into situations where I'm going into things that I'm not familiar with, like at the Abbey, capacity building is a big thing, learning new skills, learning new things to grow so we can really increase our knowledge and our wisdom. I will go into those sometimes with a lot of fear and anxiety. And if I don't get it right the first time, I slip into these real kind of negative self-talks that say I'm not really good at it. So I know that, so when I get myself into new challenging situations, that could be one of my triggers for this mind that says, you're stupid, you're not worth it, you're not competent. So I've turned that pretty much around, but that was a serious trigger for me, is new experiences, new relationships, new projects, new things that I was asked to do that I had never done before. So triggers are simply things in the environment, things in our relationships that we have some past history about that have been unpleasant. And so that's how I've been able to identify them. And part of what the Dharma does is it challenges those triggers. It challenges those things in our life that we think the only way that we can respond to them is in a unskillful, defensive, negative, destructive sort of way. So the Dharma has been really clarifying for me to challenge those situations and to challenge the reactions to them. So that's how I would define the trigger.
Okay. Thank you. I have 2 or 3 more comments and questions here. We're getting pretty close. We're at the end of our time. I don't know if you're able to stay a little bit later, or if you'd like to look at the website.
I can stay later if folks are willing to stay. I'm fine.
I'm happy to do that if you are. Okay. Okay. This is a comment from Sue. Sue says, "What wonderful timing. I've been away from my spouse for over a week, and reconnecting surprised me by the emotions that popped back up in response to the familiar triggers. A learning experience."
It's wonderful when we get insights in our life, about things that, well, it's just, I think I've always said to myself, and I say this a lot, is awareness is 50% of our practice. If we're aware of what the triggers are and where our vulnerabilities are, we're halfway there. We really are.
And this one is from Sandy. Sandy says, "Thank you for the wonderful talk. Do you think that we have the power to really make conscious choices about what we are drawn to, or do we operate on a subconscious level to some extent? How much control do we really have over ourselves?"
It's a great question. Well, the Buddhist response would be, until we realize the nature of reality directly and non-conceptually, we're going to always have a struggle around our afflictive states of mind. But I happen to be a very, very strong proponent of the Dharma, that there's going to always be challenges for many, many lifetimes to come. But I believe that the wisdom of understanding how our minds work really helps us to recognize the things that work for us, the things to cultivate, and the things to abandon. And once again, we need to start on a really gross level. Let's start with the stuff that comes out of our mouth. Let's start with the stuff that we do with our bodies. That's a great place to start. The whole idea of ethical conduct is a beautiful place to start. And as time goes on, we work on the gross stuff. We're going to start seeing the shakeup. That stuff down in the deeper resources and the places in our mind are going to start shaking up to the surface. And that's where we're going to be able to deal with them. We're going to have some more confidence because we've been watching our ethical conduct. We've been taking care of our body and speech. So now these more subtle aspects of the afflictive states of mind are going to come up to the surface, and we're going to be able to recognize them. And we're going to be able to deal with them in a little bit more finesse, a little bit more savvy. And we're going to have to be really, really patient, because the more subtler aspects of some of these unsettled states of mind take some time to heal, to process, to transform. But the Dharma does supply remarkable levels of practicality, profundity, depending on where we are in our level of practice.
One last one here from Stephen. Stephen says, "Thank you. Meditating on the causes and conditions for my emotional upheavals, I seem to have many triggers that will cause that knee-jerk emotional response. I remember reading that the word mantra actually means protection. Is there some way of using mantra that helps in these situations, I wonder?"
Boy, I think that's a wonderful, what would you say? That's almost like when you get a bee sting and you're extremely allergic, you take out your EpiPen and you put it into your thigh. So when the emotions and the triggers are well on their way, one of my favorite mantras is Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of the Buddha of compassion. Because I think, as Stephen said, they are protections for the mind. So when the mind is really revving up and starting to fly off the handle, bringing a mantra into there along with the breath really helps to hit the pause button. It may not be able to dissipate it all together, but it certainly is. It's like putting an interrupter in the middle of something very, very strong. So I use it a lot. I use it when I'm under the control of strong emotions, and I use it when I'm not, so that the familiarity is there. Yeah, I love mantra as a medicine.
I like that a lot. We were talking last week on the Daily Dharma Gathering about the pause and how it can help us work with emotions. So
and sometimes it's only 10 seconds.
Yeah, sometimes that's all you need.
A lot of these strong emotions last about 15 seconds. You know, if we can just give them some space and just pause. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your teaching.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing very much.
Would you like to dedicate the merit?
I would love to.
Please.
So for whatever insights, whatever wisdom, whatever understanding that we have garnered today as a Dharma community, let's rejoice first of all, and let's dedicate all of that wisdom, all of that insight and clarity to not only our own long-term awakening, fulfillment of our deep spiritual goals, but to the peace and harmony, the compassion, the wisdom that abides in all living beings' hearts and minds. It may be part of the light that shines, and may it really help us to connect with each and every living being that we meet. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Join us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Bye for now.